Well, hello, everybody. My name's Lissa Weinman, and I'm a volunteer at the Brattleboro Literary Festival. I'm so pleased to see you here today. It's unfortunate for this panel, which deals with such an important topic, that the No Kings March is happening at the same time, but we're really happy to have all of you have turned out here today, and very happy that BCTV is taping the proceedings so that we can all see it later on as well. So thank you for coming. I'm so pleased to, I've read both of these books, and I'm so pleased to be here today to introduce Stephanie Gorton, who is the author of The Icon and the Idealist, Margaret Sanger, Ware Dennett, and the Rivalry that brought birth control to America. It's the winner of the ASJA Award for Biography and History, and a finalist for the Plutarch Award for biography. It was also longlisted for the the Brooklyn Public Library Book Prize. Stephanie's first book was Citizen Reporters, Ida Tarbell and the Magazine That Rewrote America, which was a finalist for the Sperber Prize for journalism and biography as well. She's worked in publishing and has been a guest teacher at various prestigious colleges and universities. She's been published in the New Yorker and many other magazines. She's Lebanese American and lives in Providence, Rhode Island. Carole Joffe is a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of California, San Francisco. She's also professor emerita of sociology at UC Davis. Her professional accolades are many. She's been awarded so many awards and published many books, often with co-authors, as she has done with her latest book, after Dobbs, How the Supreme Court Ended Roe, but Not Abortion, with David Cohen, her co-author. She's served 2 terms on the board of directors for the National Abortion Federation, and I don't think there's probably anybody that we could have here today that has done as much research on reproductive care in all its aspects. So we're so pleased to have Carole here today. And I want to just start off by asking both of you, what was the most surprising thing that you really learned in the writing of your book? And of course, you know, you've both written books before, but in terms of this book and the research that went into it, and maybe we can start off with Carole, actually. Let's start off with Carole.
Okay. Is this mic working as it should? Good. Well, thank you for a very nice introduction. Thank you all for coming. There are other things happening, which I assume many of you are supportive of, so I really do appreciate it. My co-author, David Cohen, who's a very illustrious reproductive rights lawyer. He has done many cases. He and I, colleagues many years, we thought it was very important. We knew that Roe was going to be overturned. I mean, the handwriting was on the wall. We thought, let's document this process. Let's document the year 2022 that Roe went down. So we decided we would interview abortion providers and allies at the very beginning of 2022. How are you preparing? We'll interview them right after the decision. How are you feeling? How are you doing? What are you doing? And then at the end of the year, okay, Dobbs has been around now for 6 months. What's going on? How are you still getting people to abortions? We interviewed people both in banned states and legal ones. In answer to Alyssa's question, what surprised us, we did not expect, in fact, nobody in our repro world did, the number of abortions has actually gone up. The first 2 years after Dobbs, abortions have been very carefully tabulated by 2 different research groups. and the number went up. And then, that data came in as David and I were still researching it, and all of a sudden we realized, hey, we in this book are explaining why the numbers went up. The numbers went up because of extraordinary dedication on the part of the abortion providing community and its allies in the abortion funds. Now, a lot of horrible things, and I'm sure you've all read about them in the media, a lot of horrible things have happened since Dobbs, and I don't want to be understood as saying, no problem, people are getting abortions. There's lots of problems. You've read the story of very sick women being denied abortions with an ectopic pregnancy, which goes against everything they had been taught in medical school. I mean, that's insane. So bad things happen. But at the same time, otherwise healthy women who have been able to travel have gotten abortions. And I'd like to very quickly read you two short passages that explain the creativity that we saw in this field that helps explain the rise in numbers. The first person I'm going to tell you about is Tammy Cromamaker. That's her real name. We got permission to use these names. She, for many years, was the owner and director of the one abortion clinic in in North Dakota. She knew very well the minute Roe was over, her clinic was over. So even before the decision, she started looking around for another clinic in a better place. As it happens, her clinic in Fargo was right on the border with Minnesota. So she started looking for a property across state lines where she could continue her work. And then where I'm going to start here is her finding the building. Although the building was larger than the clinic's needs, there were very suitable options in Moorhead, Minnesota. So Tammy decided to set in motion its possible purchase. However, she was determined to keep her intentions private for as long as possible, fearing the anti-abortion protesters in the area would put pressure on those selling the building and the contractors that Tammy would need to hire. She also feared the possibility of physical danger to the facility. Given the small size of the community of Fargo, Tammy succeeded in keeping her plans private to a remarkable degree, from the earliest stages of negotiations through the remodeling process and almost until the final move-in date in the summer of 2022. Hoping not to be recognized, she accomplished this feat in part by wearing sunglasses and a large hat on her numerous trips to property. And now I just want to read you another selection about Tammy's move. And I think the importance of this selection that I'm sharing is how vastly different the politics of two adjoining states can be. The move to Moorhead opened a brand new world to Tammy. In particular, the political environment in Minnesota regarding abortion was starkly different from what Tammy had known for decades in North Dakota. For instance, while working to get her new clinic ready, she noticed a call on her cell phone from an unrecognized number. Like many parents, upon seeing an unknown number, Tammy feared something had happened to her college-age daughter, so she answered apprehensively. The caller turned out to be Senator A.B. Klobuchar, one of Minnesota's 2 U.S. senators. As Tammy paraphrased the conversation, the senator said, quote, "Thank you so much for what you are doing. We will do our part. We've got your back." This never would have happened in North Dakota. Can I read a little bit more from Curtis? Sure. Okay. The other person I want to tell you about is a doctor called Dr. Curtis Boyd. Today he's actually 90. He, before Roe, provided illegal abortions with the clergy consultation service. By the time we got to talking to him, he was the owner and medical director of 2 abortion clinics in Texas and New Mexico. Another fact that's really important to appreciate what Curtis was doing, that he came from a very fundamentalist religious community in Texas. As a teenager, his grandfather said, "This boy has the gift," and Curtis, as a teenager, was was ordained as a Baptist minister. And then later went on to have a very high-profile career in abortion provision. Anyway, okay, so here we go. In many ways, it was a fantastical proposal. In late 2021, a group of clergy approached Curtis Boyd, the owner and medical director of 2 abortion clinics in Texas and New Mexico, about flying patients from Texas to New Mexico to receive abortion care after the 6th week of pregnancy. Patients would be accompanied by a member of the clergy and arrive back home in Texas later the same day. To those who didn't know Curtis, probably nothing about this makes sense. Clergy helping abortion patients, an abortion provider devising a plan to fly patients, and patients going to this length to get an abortion. But to Curtis, everything about this plan made sense, except for one thing: the political landscape that necessitated its creation. And I'll skip some of the reading. So basically the plan was a Unitarian minister who was actually a chaplain at Curtis's Dallas clinic, was going to accompany patients on the flight. Most of these patients had never been on a flight. Once they got to New Mexico, another clergy group called the Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights would meet the patients, take them to the clinic. So a lot of surprises here. We don't normally think of clergy accompanying patients to abortions, but in fact, that's not unusual in the abortion providing world. Anyway, so let me just read you another passage from Curtis. In light of his background as a Baptist preacher, it's not surprising that Curtis was particularly gratified by the involvement with the ministers in this program. He told us, quote, "It's a powerful symbolic issue. When everyone's thinking, well, if you're religious, you're anti-abortion. If you're abortion, you must not believe in God. You're not a good Christian." What we want to do is to counter that and say, look, these are ordained ministers, chaplains. They believe in your right. They want to help you. They are going as shepherds, if you will. Okay, I'll stop here. And let me just say one thing. This flying of patients across state lines actually started before Roe was overturned. In Texas, de facto, there was barely, at the time Curtis initiated this, you could only get an abortion up to 6 weeks. So he continued this program after Roe was over.
Yeah. So, Stephanie, what did you find most surprising about your research and writing of the book? And I think the issue of strange bedfellows has come up too, which is very prevalent in your work. And just to mention, it's what you're talking about in your book happened 100 years ago, but we see so many striking parallels, which was what was so great to compare the 2 books. But
exactly. So we're flashing back exactly a century to the 1920s. Before I start, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's here. Thanks for the intro, and what an honor it is to be sitting next to Carole Joffe today. Reading your book, I couldn't help but think, like, this is somebody who has asked exactly the right questions to the right people at the right time, and that is so hard to do. And we all benefit from what has come out of it.
Thank you very much.
I started researching this book because I have been involved in my local abortion fund for several years. And I saw, we withstood Dobbs and the surge of donations that came after that, and then the fall off of those donations. But even before that, I had started thinking to myself, we tend to think of the abortion movement as starting with Roe. But the movement for reproductive freedom did not start with Roe. So that drew me to the birth control movement of the 1920s. And in the traditional, great man version of history, we associate Margaret Sanger with the right to birth control, founded Planned Parenthood. Many people know that and know of her complex legacy as well. But Mary Ware Dennett very quickly surfaces as someone who was equally, if not more, visionary in the birth control movement. So I think my greatest surprise was just that there's this very fraught relationship at the heart of the reproductive justice movement, that the first person to ever take reproductive rights to Congress is an individual that few people have heard of. And just that this was a very radical movement. This book is a dual biography of two people, but it's also a biography of how sex moved from the realm of taboo into being really a mainstream cultural obsession. And that goes for birth control as well. After I had each of my children, 6 weeks later, I was being asked what birth control method I intended to use, in the doctor's office. This is something that is a pillar of healthcare today. 100 years ago, it was scandalous that this middle-aged single mother artist was mentioning diaphragms and bodily autonomy and birth control in senators' offices and trying to pass a bill to legalize birth control. She saw the problems with the Comstock Acts, long before we started wrangling with them today. The book was full of surprises. The research was a total joy. And it also really, seeing how the movement kind of rose and fell, the lives of these particular people and what they really thought the impact of their work was and what it actually has proved to be in the sweep of time. It shows you what a long game activism really is. Mary Ware Dennett considered herself a failure as far as activism went, but in fact, everything that has come afterwards rests on the foundation of her work. So I thought that was very inspiring in a time when we could all use some of that.
And the relationship between these two icons is absolutely fascinating. And I know that you have a passage that you'd like to share regarding their first meeting. Sure,
yes. Well, it's an introduction to a little bit to who they both were and how their relationship started. So Margaret Sanger's work in birth control came out of her work as a visiting nurse in the tenement neighborhoods of the Lower East Side. She had also grown up extremely impoverished as the 6th of 11 surviving children in her family. And in addition to those 11 surviving children, her mother had at least 7 or 8 miscarriages, and then died at age 50, having been pregnant or nursing for the majority, or miscarrying for the majority of her roughly 30 years of marriage. And after seeing what her mother went through, Sanger begins working as a visiting nurse and sees many more poor and immigrant women, going through the exact same ordeal that her mother had. Mary Ware Dennett came to the work through a very different path. She had been, she's the idealist of the title. She had been an art professor and a designer. She had gotten married to a fellow kind of dreamer, and they settled and built this kind of utopian farm in Massachusetts where they convened all kinds of meetings and continued making art together. But then motherhood came for her, and she had 3 extremely traumatic births. Her second child only lived for 3 weeks. He died of malnutrition because she was unable to feed him, and there was no other way for him to be fed. And after her third child, doctors told her that if she risked another pregnancy, she would probably die. With no birth control advice, their only option was abstinence. And within a couple of years, her husband had left the family. So Dennett is forced to get a paying job. She's the sole person responsible for her kids financially in terms of taking care of them. So I'm just going to read very briefly from where Dennett and Sanger first crossed paths. They're such different people, but their vision for the future just has a lot in common. And that, created a lot of complexity for them later on in life. As the 19th century turned to the 20th, New York City was one of the few places in America where a woman could claim a new identity within a week or two. In Manhattan, working girls filled boarding houses, sweatshops, and dance halls, far from the enforcing authorities of home, whether they came from a farm, village, or shtetl. Each passing year, girls moved away from their families of origin in greater numbers than ever before, driven by economic volatility, the Great Migration, and eventually by the mobilizations of the First World War. They took jobs as secretaries and telephone girls, in factory work and domestic service, and this public-facing labor, along with their paychecks, granted them a surer voice in their households. In Greenwich Village, freethinkers launched magazines, schools, and activist leagues that fomented rebellion against the grinding demands of a free market economy and suffocating social conventions. Although she was at 38, older than most of her fellow strivers pulled to the metropolis, Mary Ware Dennett relished her chance at reinvention. Here she wasn't merely a pleading wife, she was an independent adventurer among many others like her. As she took up work with the National Suffrage Campaign, Dennett began to inhabit a role that never would have found her back home in Framingham, a force to be reckoned with in the women's movement. It would be more than a decade until she returned to making art. Her longtime New York City home was in Astoria, Queens, in an apartment with a couple of bedrooms at 81 Singer Street. For the first few years, though, Dennett lived in a studio apartment in Midtown Manhattan on the 4th floor of a brand new building at 350 West 55th Street. Her window looked out on a large sign advertising a carpet cleaning service. An opera singer lived next door, and her voice exercises could be heard through the wall. There wasn't enough space for her sons to stay. When Carlton and Devin came from Framingham, where they were cared for by friends and boarding schools, to New York, she'd cross the street and book a 25-cent room for them at the Mills Hotel, getting a discount if they checked out by 6:30 a.m. Those visits were golden. She kept their free days busy with roller skating and picnics up the Hudson. She loved that Carlton especially shared her intoxication with Manhattan, calling it an imagination city on late summer evenings when, in her words, the skyline was silhouetted in pale gray against a hazy, rosy sunset with the spidery bridges spun across the pearl-colored view. Dennett had been caricatured during her divorce in the Boston press as one of the most zealous of the militant suffragists, a dowdy, over-serious contrast to her ex-husband's more alluring lover. Once in New York, she began to reckon with this exaggerated image and tailor it to size. She embraced some accoutrement of radical Greenwich Village. She cropped her dark blonde hair short, strung beads around her neck, and wrote a little fiction. Far from downplaying her single mother status, in 1911 she had a New Year's card made, showing herself alone against a New York cityscape, with portraits of Carlton and Devin on either side. Dennett likely first saw Margaret Sanger at a lecture. She'd taken a seat at Polly's restaurant on McDougal Street in Greenwich Village, a self-consciously anarchist bistro where management sometimes addressed patrons as bourgeois pigs. There, one Saturday in 1914, Sanger delivered a talk on birth control. Sanger was 34 or 35 at that time, Dennett 7 years older. At the lecture, Dennett would have seen a narrow, straight-backed figure with warm auburn hair and greenish hazel eyes, who talked about birth control in a common-sense tone, with an occasional smile and constantly gesticulating hands. Yet the lecture fell flat. Sanger complained that she'd struck no responsive chord with the crowd. She was profoundly irritated afterward, sensing this lack of enthusiasm. Well-known feminists like Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Crystal Eastman, and Henrietta Rodman were inscrutable and misguided to Sanger. It seemed unbelievable, she wrote, they could be serious in occupying themselves with what I regarded as trivialities, when mothers within a stone's throw of their meetings were dying shocking deaths. Sanger had no appetite for watching such a concentration of intelligence, energy, and money channeled toward debating whether women should keep their maiden names or maintain a separate property just for themselves after marriage. Hundreds of thousands of laundresses, cloak makers, scrub women, servants, telephone girls, shop workers would gladly have changed places with the feminists in return for the right to have leisure, to be lazy a little now and then, Sanger wrote. Her desire to grab their shoulders and shake them palpable. When I suggested the basis of feminism might be the right to be a mother, regardless of church or state, their inherited prejudices were instantly aroused. She held out little hope of inspiring them to direct action beyond fundraising balls. Despite the apparent indifference of the crowd that day, Dennett was rapt. Sanger's insistence that birth control was paramount to women achieving equal rights resonated with ideas Dennett had just started putting into words herself. After the meeting, she invited Sanger to her apartment for lunch. They exchanged stories about their lives, talking long into the afternoon. Here was Dennett, a highly educated divorcee without much money, but with an insider's knowledge of the loudest feminist crusade of the day. Sanger grouped her with the abstract intellectual bunch. But unlike most of that set, Dennett saw the urgency and promise of Sanger's work. Out of that meeting, a promising collaboration began to take shape.
Thank you. A promising collaboration that really didn't occur. But that passage, gives us that sort of personal portrait of these women, and that's a subject I'd like you both to comment on, because in your book, we learn about the personal animus and the cost of being activist with both Margaret Sanger and Mary Ware Dennett. And of course, in your work, you've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands over your career, of the people who are actually doing this work. In the case of Mary Ware Dennett, she was on trial for obscenity charges. Margaret Sanger was also dragged through the mud. We know what happens with abortion providers and people who talk about this issue. Could you both comment a little bit about, how you see the people and what animates them to keep pushing for equality and justice in these areas?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say what a tour de force this book is. I mean, this book it's really extraordinary book, written beautifully and filling a real gap in the scholarship.
I'm using your quote on the paperback. So.
Fine with me. I'd be honored. In other words, just about, quote, everybody knows about Margaret Sanger. Yes. Not that many people know about this other person who played such an important role. So, this book is really extraordinary. Okay, what animates the people, is a belief, well, actually, rather than giving you my own words, let me quote two icons. Yes. to use Stephanie's language. The first icon, of course, is Margaret Sanger, in her famous quote, "No woman can call herself free if she does not control her body." The second icon is Gloria Steinem, who I'm sure is familiar to all of you, who very graciously gave a blurb for my book and says, "This is a crucial book about democracy. If females are able to give birth, they must be able to decide whether they wish to give birth. Otherwise, half the human race is not living in a democracy." And that says it all. I mean, what's quite interesting to me is one of the things authoritarian regimes, which we are sort of in now, one of the things they do is really shut down women's reproductive freedom. We've seen this all through history. We've seen it in Romania. We've seen it when Putin came to power in Russia and attacks not just on gays, but on birth control and on abortion. Similarly, fights like this in Poland. So what animates the people that I have studied all these years is their belief. They use different language. Some use explicitly feminist language. Some use more human rights language. I proudly wear a T-shirt that says reproductive rights are human rights. So yeah, it's so complicated politically. but so simple on one level. I mean, as both Steinem and Sanger are saying, women cannot take part, or anybody who's pregnancy capable, let's put it that way. Anybody, no matter how they identify, if they are pregnancy capable, they cannot take part in public life if they can't control their fertility.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I hadn't known before researching the book that feminism and feminists kind of came into parlance in the 1910s and the 1920s in that time. And what was meant by that was that women should have the same opportunities as men. And so for Dennett and Sanger, these ideas, as Carole just said, really come from this place of, well, we are no longer, just more child than adults, more child than citizen. We're no longer require the paternalism or the patriarchy of an all-male government. We should be part of it. The movement for suffrage is happening at the same time. That, our voices should be heard and our bodies should be our own. They're two very closely connected movements. I think for Dennett and Sanger, what animated them was slightly different in that Sanger was really savvy, really charismatic, great at making money or marrying money, and she just wanted to get this done in her lifetime. She also famously said, when the house is on fire, you don't go, delicately announcing what you might like to have in the future. You insist that the house is on fire and urgent measures need to be taken. You scream and you run out of the house. So her methods were different from Dennett's, because she saw only an upside to breaking the law to further the cause. She opened a birth control clinic in 1916. She knew it would be raided by police, but she saw that as an opportunity for publicity to stoke outrage for the cause. When she floundered in Congress after Dennett withdrew, Sanger immediately jumped in Washington, trying to legalize birth control, and found the same kind of hostile, mocking reception that Dennett had found. And so she pivoted to the courts and said, all right, we will just do this through a judge's decision then. And that's what ended up happening. Dennett was in Washington between 1919 and 1925. She just wanted to delete a few words from the Comstock Act that would release contraception from the list of banned things. And just to rewind a little bit, the Comstock Act is this censorship law. It was passed in 1873. It was officially meant to stem the flow of pornography through the mail, but what it actually did was put a real chill on anything connected with sex education. Parents would not be able to write their adult children letters of advice about sex or information. The trade in contraceptives was made illegal kind of overnight, or moved to being a black market trade. Abortionists could no longer promote themselves. This is something that's still on the books, although the prohibition on birth control has been stripped out. So Dennett thought, well, if we can just at least delete the prohibition on contraception, this is going to open up the market, and women will be able to get, women all over the US will be able to get what they need once again, as long as they have access to some kind of mail order service or a clinic. They can get the latest method, whether it's a diaphragm, whether it's some kind of cervical cap, or even a box of condoms, it will be available. When Sanger pivoted to the courts, Dennett was just really upset by this. She said, that's one way to get it done in our lifetime. But then the Constitution doesn't really reflect, the law books don't really reflect that women have this right, or that people, are able to control their fertility from now on. And she maintained through her relatively short life that it was not enough. And it was uncanny really reading it and seeing that she knew, that we're setting ourselves up for, courts to change, for, vulnerable decisions to be reinterpreted.
She was remarkably prescient in that way.
She was.
As we see today. Do you have any comment on what Stephanie just said? Yeah,
I agree.
I wanted to, ask you, well, one thing that was interesting was before Mary Ware Dennett and Margaret Sanger began, there was actually a very robust trade in birth control methods, or, who knows if all of them worked, but, I think it was the chapter on this nefarious business in your book where you sort of talk about something like half the ads were for products and douches and different things like this. So, yeah, the market stepped in, but then when the Comstock law came, a lot of that was cut back. What dangers do you both see today in terms of changes? The Comstock law has been evoked. Obviously, Clarence Thomas has even suggested that birth control might not be available in the future. But what kinds of things are happening now in the second Trump administration that give you pause?
Well, let me answer. More than pause, they give me nightmares.
Yes.
Let me answer this by saying, I am struck by the continuities
Yes.
of, what Stephanie was talking about, 100 years ago. We've come full circle. And let me illustrate this the best way I can. On the 3 days ago in the New York Times, not a front page article, just this little item, that the Trump administration has laid off the people almost all the staff who work in the Office of Population Affairs. This is not high profile. This is an obscure agency that is incredibly important. What the Office of Population Affairs does is it handles the grants for Title X, another obscure law that's incredibly important. This is the federal program that makes available to low-income women and teenagers birth control. And not just birth control, the whole range of family planning service, which is not only birth control, but also cancer screenings and STD screenings and so on. So, and this is a, quote, brilliant move by the Trump administration. They know the public is not with them. They are pleasing the quote, pro-life part of their base, who is furious that Trump hasn't done even more. There's no press release from the Trump administration saying we are banning birth control. We are just basically taking the steps to make sure that no poor women have access to it. And there's much more to be scared about. And if you can be here till 4 p.m., I'd be happy to enlighten you. Another thing the pro-life forces both within Congress and without are trying to do is to redefine some methods of birth control as, quote, abortifacients. So, for example, long-acting reversible contraception, LARC, which is what we now refer to, what used to be referred to as IUDs, intrauterine devices. The first generation of intrauterine devices were dangerous. They just weren't good. Now they are safe and highly effective. Abortion opponents say, no, they are, LARC is really killing a baby. That's nonsense. That's scientific nonsense.
Yes. Okay. Do you have a response to that as well, for just regarding? We've got, how many minutes do we have left? I think it's 5.
It is 1:40.
Okay, great, because we want to leave some time for book signing. And also, if anybody has a burning question in the audience, you can, okay, but you want to answer that?
Just to say that I think there's, there's such a there are many points of connection between the books, but one that I really noticed was just the impact of not just technology, but the gatekeeping over this technology, which can be very fascinating to see what is actually in the interest of patient safety, and then what is done purely for the purposes of gatekeeping. So I thought Carole's book just illuminates that and kind of made me wish I had really dwelled on that a little bit more, even though the technology, maybe the abortion pill versus the diaphragm, it's the same issue that comes around again.
Right, and that also comes down to Margaret Sanger's focus on the medicalization,
Right.
and Mary Ware Dennett's sort of orientation more on, personal access. There was a question in the back there, yes?
I'm wondering, a couple of years ago we had a book, a fiction book that was written, it was called Mercy Street. And I think Jennifer Haig wrote it. And she makes a connection between white supremacy and the so-called right to life. That, the press to ban abortions has a lot to do with, we want more white babies. Can you comment on that? Do you see that, or is that?
There's a direct connection between activists and, the more extreme activists in the anti-abortion movement, and what we now see as the white supremacists. On January 6th, there were a number of anti-abortion activists there. There's some very good scholarship on that. Let me give you the name, Carole Mason. She wrote a new book called From the Clinic to From the Clinic. I may not have the title exactly right, but basically From the Clinic to the Insurrection. In other words, and she argues very convincingly that much of the present stuff we're dealing with, the anti-abortion movement gave a template. For example, the contempt for science. Making stuff up. Abortion, oral contraception will kill you. Nonsense, a lie that many people believe. So yes, in answer to your question, there are very direct links between white supremacists and the more extreme wings of the anti-abortion movement.
This might be actually a good opportunity just for you to comment on Margaret Sanger's posthumous reputation regarding eugenics.
Yes, I think because birth control movement and the eugenics movement were connected really early on. Eugenics was incredibly popular a century ago. This was before the atrocities of the Nazi regime had come to light. Eugenics was seen as progressive, scientific, this idea that there are the fit and the unfit. Never mind that the fit are always white and able-bodied, and the unfit, it's this very kind of loose collection of qualifications. If you were illiterate, if you had alcoholism, you still had a chance of being designated unfit. It was a very unscientific, pseudoscientific way of thought, but incredibly politically popular. All kinds of laws inspired by eugenics were just kind of swept through in the 20s. Immigration restriction, forced sterilization with Buck v. Bell in 1927. So the state has the right to forcibly sterilize anybody that it deems unfit. And of course, the major population who's targeted here are poor women of color, really the most powerless at that time. Because eugenics was so popular and so persuasive to many people in the halls of power, Sanger really fervently courted the eugenics leadership and tried to get them to make birth control a plank in their agenda. Dennett tried this, but she, got the message pretty early on that eugenicists were not feminists, that they had really no interest in giving individual women control over their fertility. They wanted to control entire populations from the top down. But Sanger really went for it, and especially her anti-disability writing and speaking, is very disturbing to read today. And you can see why Planned Parenthood would have taken her name off of their building in New York City, for instance. It's hard to really stand by her eugenics-inspired materials that are around now in the light of what we have seen happens when eugenics is allowed free reign.
I'm sorry.
That's
Can I quickly comment?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
As Stephanie has said, some of her statements, some taken out of context,
right.
Some not,
Yes.
have been used today by the anti-abortion movement, claiming she was racist. A number of very respected reproductive justice scholars, who are African American. Loretta Ross, the name might be familiar to some of you. What Loretta and other Black feminists have argued is, no, she actually wasn't racist. Sanger opened a clinic in Harlem. She opened a clinic in the South when nobody else would. She had distinguished Black intellectuals and public health people, as advisors. So she actually arguably was not racist. However, she definitely, as Stephanie has suggested, was an ableist. Today the distinction is not often made because you can't put it on a bumper sticker. Mm-hmm. And one final thing on that, she initially tried to get money from the feminist movement of that period, who were absolutely focused on suffrage, did not want to get into icky stuff like sex. She tried to get money from the medical community, who did not at the time want much to do with her. Later, it changed. So arguably, the eugenics movement was the only game in town for her, which does not excuse, of course, the ableist stuff she said.
Yes, so much for her was about the political expediency and
it was getting money.
Keeping her work
just
going.
Obsessed with money.
There was another, yes.
This may not even seem like a question that has any sense to it, but I'm constantly confused by why other first world countries, European countries, for example, have gone through this process and they have, what is it with it? What is our problem here? Why is it that we can't get there in this country?
No, that's a very, very great question that nobody has any particularly good answer to. One answer often given is there's just the deep wells of religiosity in this country that are really contrasted with, nominally Catholic countries, as I'm sure you know, like France and Spain and Italy, have legalized this stuff. The anti-abortion movement in this country is desperately trying to export itself to Europe with virtually no success, although they have a lot of success in Africa. But, there's two things. One is the sort of fundamentalist. The other is the Puritan. Here, sitting here in Vermont and next to in New England. Those ideas still hold some sway, but it is puzzling and obviously deeply frustrating.
And as those countries you have just named pay a portion of their taxes, all of the Nordic countries, Germany for sure, pay a portion of their taxes to the church. But anyway, thank you. Thank you for...
Well, thank you for a good question.
Yeah. There was another question at the couch back there. Yeah.
Hi. I came in a little late, so I apologize, but I'm not sure if you would address this, but RFK just launched an investigation into, and to me it's, ironic is the wrong word, but they were like, oh, we're gonna give it to the states. And if that happens, that's obviously not the case, and now possibly a countrywide ban on this. Last night, one of the questions was, do you have hope for humanity? So I guess my question is, do you have hope for women's rights over their own bodies and the option for us to continue to have access to IUD, continue to have access to birth control, and especially with the latest closing and the Title IX, and that impacts millions of people across this country. I guess the question is, do you have hope? And do we have a future where we actually continue to have rights?
Great question. I don't want to dominate. Did you?
I will say that though, reading after Dobbs will give you hope, because you see the people who are actually doing the work, and just how there's a lot of strength in collaboration there. And for the future, I would also say that taking a deep historical view over the past few years, like I said, it just shows that activism is a very long game. And that, if you get into advocacy, thinking that within a session or two, some big breakthrough is going to happen. It's almost never the case. Yeah, I know. You just sort of have to like engage with the expectation that potentially, 2 or 3 generations later, there, something could happen, but to show up as much as humanly possible. So I do have hope. I think everybody should. Otherwise, it's hard to know how to move forward.
How to get up in the morning. If I can add to what Stephanie said, yes, I do have hope. I mean, also terror, but no, seriously, but hope. I mean, the reason I have hope, and you started to mention it, we haven't really talked about medication abortion. That's abortion pills. And as our person there mentioned, I mean, RFK and the Trump administration will no doubt will try very hard to restrict it. I mean, if you think the anti-abortion movement is not furious that the number of abortions went up after they had reached their dream of overturning Roe, I mean, they are beside themselves. So one thing they're going to try to do is ban abortion pills, but they can't. That's the straw of hope here. Abortion pills, medication abortion, two drugs. One of them actually works by itself. They can ban the distribution of them. They can ban clinics from offering it. There's websites all over the world that mail these pills out to people. And these pills these pills have been tested. They're not sugar pills. They actually work. And there's all kinds of underground distribution. They are available online. If anybody wants to learn more, go to a website called Plan C, because they tell you every single option that, a 15-year-old sitting in Alabama, if she has access to a computer, can get these pills. So yes, they can't ban abortion. They can make it much harder. They can cause a great deal of human suffering, but they cannot ultimately ban abortion.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much. Thank you both very much.